Hi, I'm Joe Chumalo, CEO of PG Partner. Welcome to another CupoJoe. This is a very special one with a special guest, Dr. Russell James. Yes, that Dr. Russell James. And this is an interview. We're not going to talk too much about plan giving. We want to know about the man. As fundraisers, we are insatiably curious, right? We want to really learn people's stories and the emotional side of people and what motivates them and what their life has been like. So we're going to spend about 30 to 45 minutes exploring what's Russell James, the man, like. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for showing up. All the best. Russell, thank you so much for being here today.
Happy to be here, Joe. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and thanks for everything that you've done for all of us in the industry. It really helped, consultants, you've helped people on the fundraising side. And I can't think of anybody else that has brought so much value and kindness to our business. Thank you.
Well, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Hey, I'm just glad people are interested. If I do stuff and it just sits on my shelf back here, it doesn't have any impact in the world. So I'm glad that people that are actually out there making a difference find it useful.
Yeah. And so this is very different, as I said in the introduction before we got on. This is about you, the man, Russell James, the man, not the attorney, PhD, financial advisor, plan giving godfather. This is really about you. And as fundraisers, we're insatiably curious. I think that's really one of the best skill sets that we have, is to really generally have interest in people and their stories and what they're passionate about, and have a more emotional conversation as we discuss. So
sure.
Thank you. So first off, do you have a nickname other than Russell and Dr. James? Anybody call you anything?
No, they do, but it's much less pleasant. So I like to keep it to something like Russell is fine. But in class, Professor James or Dr. James, but out of class, it's just Russell.
Great. And so start from the beginning. Where did you grow up? What was your childhood like?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in northern Kansas City North, which, as it turns out, is completely different than North Kansas City. That's a separate town. So I go through all of this with somebody who's from the area, so they know the code words that we use for the regions and all of that. Came from extreme wealth. My father was a firefighter and my mother was an English high school teacher, right? So obviously I'm going to get into wealth management with that kind of a background, right? No, so that was the background. And reality is that my mother was a teacher, her father was a teacher, and so the fact that I ended up as a professor is not a complete shock. But that was the background, and went from there to the University of Missouri in Columbia, and that's where I got my undergraduate degree, which is in economics. Now, it's a bit of a weird economics undergraduate degree. At the university there at the time, you could choose whether to get your BS or BA in economics. And so the BS is the business school degree. The BA was the arts and science college degree. And so I got the BA, which required a language. So I had 13 hours of Latin, had to take a bunch of history and literature, and that was all Greek and Roman studies. And so I ended up with more hours in classical civilizations than I did in economics at the end of the process. But my degree technically was in economics. And, after that, I went to law school. My goal as a undergraduate student was to get into Harvard Law School. That was my one goal. And in fact, ultimately I did get accepted to Harvard Law School. But at the time, basically Harvard said, you're going to graduate with massive debt, and no, we're not going to give you any scholarships. And University of Missouri Law School said, we'll give you full tuition scholarship. And so made the decision at that point, I think I'm just going to go to the University of Missouri, stay here, with the nice scholarship. And that ended up being important because graduating without debt made a big difference on what kinds of job options and career choices that I could choose. So,
excuse me, Russell, what time period is it? What time period are we talking?
Oh, sure. So this would have been 1988 when I graduated from high school. and then started law school. So did the undergraduate relatively quickly, shaved a year off of that. So would have been in law school in 91, because I graduated in 94. This is here we're in the just started March of 2024, and I actually started teaching college classes in the spring of 1994. So I finished 30 years of teaching the college classes along the way. So yeah, that would have been the time frame with that. And sometimes people ask me, well, how did you get into planned giving, right? And nonprofits and all of that. And of course, I think like most of us, this isn't what, when you're in junior high and you say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, I want to be a fundraiser, right? That's not normally how people get into it. I joke with people that want to know how I got into it, that it's a really emotional story. You might want to grab a Kleenex. And so here, I will tell you how it happened,
Please, love to hear.
and I'm being facetious there.
Oh,
So
okay.
I went to law school with the very noble purpose of being able to sue people and keep a third. I wanted to be an ambulance chaser.
Seriously? Really?
Plaintiff's attorney. Wanted to be in trial. In high school, I had won the state championship in debate and had been very, involved in that sort of competitive speaking. And so I was all about being a litigator, ideally in plaintiff's personal injury. And so I spent some time interning for those kinds of firms, both before law school and then with more sort of large corporate litigation firms after law school started. And just to be a little bit offensive with my description, I found that a lot of the guys that were really, and they were guys that were really good as litigators, especially as plaintiffs' attorneys, they tended to be alcoholics on their third marriage. And so
Yeah.
I kind of looked at the intensity of that lifestyle. And it wasn't that I looked at that and said that I wouldn't be competitive. It was actually the opposite, that I know if you put me in that environment, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be competitive. And I'm not sure that's a wise life decision. And, especially at that point, second year of law school, was newly married and making some of those choices. And along the way, an interesting thing happened. And that was that the one thing that I didn't like about the law school where I went, University of Missouri, that was fairly unhappy about, even though I chose it, was that they made everyone take tax law in the 1L year. And I'm like, I don't want to take stupid tax law. I want to sue people. I don't, I'm going to be a LA law guy, stand in front of a jury, make me take stupid tax law. Well, it turns out I get the highest score in the class and I loved it. And of course, sort of an obvious thing in retrospect. Well, you're an econ major. Of course you love this stuff, and the same thing later. Then I took estate and gift taxation and planning and got the highest score in that class. Love that too. And, and the classes that there were several classes I got the high score in the class, and they were these tax law classes, property law 1, property law 2, and all of a sudden this theme started to emerge of, hey, here's stuff that you really like doing, right? And so then I had the decision to make. I had interned at kind of the big corporate law firm and had an offer from them. And at the same time had an offer from a nonprofit that I cared about. It's Central Christian College, mostly a ministry training focused institution. It's where my wife had been attending while I was in law school. So I already had kind of pre-existing connections with that. And I remember that the salary offer was exactly 1/5 of the offer from the corporate law
No
firm.
surprise, right?
But part of that was, I was able to, because of my, vast economic analysis ability, I was able to take that salary and divide it by the number of hours that they expected you to work and recognize that it wasn't quite as good of a deal as you might have thought it would have been. So the arrangement that I had actually with the school was I would be there as a full-time employee, get full benefits, but they also would allow me to have my own estate planning practice as an attorney. And the nice thing about an estate planning practice is, as compared to with other areas of the law, you, number one, get to work with really good people who are not under stress. And that's certainly not the case when you're in litigation or criminal law or family law. These are very high stress situations. And so, I really came to enjoy it, and had that balance where I had my own estate planning practice, but I was also doing plan gift fundraising for the college, and did that for about 6 years.
Excuse me, I'm
Yeah, go
sorry, what
ahead.
time period are we in now?
Okay, so now we would be starting in 1994, and so through about 2000 at this point.
So you had
Um,
two, did you have two, you had your own practice and then you were working for the college as well
correct, correct.
as
So
the director of plan giving?
that's right. So I started
Huh.
out as assistant director the first year. We're transitioning off of the person who was retiring, and then I was director from that point forward. But always had the estate planning practice as well, and it kind of gave me that experience where I'd sat at kind of different sides of the table, so to speak. That sometimes working for the nonprofits, sometimes just working directly as the client's advisor, as the estate planning attorney. And the conversations can be very different when you are in those different roles for people. And so I think it was helpful just understanding what that experience was like from different sides. So that would have been for the first approximately 6 years. And along the way, I would also teach an evening class on it might be religious liberties in the law, or American government, or something that was related to my background. And I kind of felt like this whole college professor thing, I think that's maybe what I want to do. And that's when I went back and to the University of Missouri, and worked on finishing my PhD. And so that's in consumer economics. My dissertation was on religious charitable giving, which obviously fits where I was working at the time, and worked on that over the next few years. Now, an unusual thing happened at the college where I had worked, and ultimately, through various transitions, the board asked me to serve as president. I had been briefly as academic dean, and then briefly as acting president, and then basically went full time in the PhD program. And then they called me back and said, "Hey, what about being our full-time or permanent president?" And so that at that institution, as it is at many smaller colleges, was largely a major gifts focused role. And so during that time, we completed two major capital campaigns, that really the first in the history of the college, in a formal sense. And those were successful. And so for me, that was another range of experiences, because now it wasn't plan giving, it was major gifts. And so it was very different kind of immediacy and goals. And I wasn't just fundraising, I was also managing fundraisers.
And what
And
was
so
that like?
it
Did you enjoy
was a
it?
learning experience. Part of it wasn't, I don't think I came to it and say, oh, I am the Michael Jordan performer, right? It was more that I came to it and I was trying to learn as fast as possible. And so that meant, in many cases, making as many mistakes as possible, right? And learning through those processes, and also learning from other people who would do it well. So if I can share a story that's not about me, Joe, but I'll give you an example of something that I
Please,
learned along the way,
please.
which is one of the reasons I'm such a huge fan of your work. So you may enjoy this story. So I was looking at our similar religiously affiliated ministry training schools, colleges, seminaries, and universities and such. And typically, you can predict what the fundraising is supposed to be for an institution. You basically look at what's your alumni base, what's your tuition level. You can, as an economist, you can predict, okay, you're going to be raising about this much. And there is this one little school in Tennessee that was raising money, rural Tennessee, that was raising money completely out of proportion to their size or their alumni base, or or anything. And it was just they just trained ministers. It was a seminary. And so I'm like, okay, I got to figure out what's going on there. Okay. So I fly in. We happen to be having a meeting nearby, and talk to the guy. And it's a pretty small shop. Like, it's one guy with support staff. Sometimes it's two people with support staff, kind of depends. But the one guy had been there for, many years, and sometimes it's the other person. And so he talked about how he did fundraising, which was dramatically different than anything I'd ever heard before. So he explained that he had a physical condition which had a negative side effect. And that side effect was he never knew when he was going to have a good day or a bad day. If he wakes up and it's a bad day, he's not going into work. That happened relatively frequently, never knew when it was going to hit. And because of that, Joe, he couldn't do the one thing that every major gifts fundraiser has to do. He couldn't keep appointments. So here's what he did. He would take the list of donors. They had donors all over the country, because their ministers would minister all over the country, and so then people would make a gift because of the connection to the minister. So he would, for example, let's say, fly into the Pacific Northwest, take the list of donors, drive to the first house, knock on the door.
Excuse me, without an appointment?
No appointment. Just drive to the first house, knock on the door, right? If the person was home and opens the door, then he just, and he had his kind of standard presentation. Hey, we're just in the area. And our president asked if I would drop off this gift just to thank you for your years of support for the organization. Just wanted to let you know we really appreciate it. Two things about this. One, of course, if they weren't home, handwritten note, left with the gift, it was in the area, really appreciate your support. The other thing is that he was always invited in. Now, if they were busy, didn't have time, no problem. It took, 2 minutes out of their day. He was always invited in, given the age of their longtime donors, given the fact that he's a minister, so he likes talking to people that they support because of their preacher or minister, and so he's invited in, and he basically does what, for the most part, is a ministry visit, right? How are things going in your life? Is there anything I can pray with you about? Is that, what's taking place, and that sort of relationship building. Now, he actually would always end every meeting saying, I did want you to let you know, this is what's happening on campus. This is our current campaign. The president has asked for me to have you consider making a gift towards the campaign. I don't want you to make any decision today. I'm going to leave this envelope here for you to make your decision as to, what you want to do. He has suggested a gift of blank, but take your time on that, whatever's comfortable for you. We're not going to do that here today. I'm just here to thank you today, right? So here's the thing. He did that every year. And because he did that every year, pretty soon you know the name of the dog and the grandkids, and it's almost like the annual kind of social visit or ministry visit, right? And a couple of other things that were interesting about this. There was another school that had a related religious affiliation. I won't name the school. Let's just say they're in Malibu, California, if that helps you narrow it down any. And so obviously they have a very different sort of donor base, right? If you're in Malibu, California, and their donors tend to be from the region. He shadowed them just to learn about their fundraising. He told them what he did for his fundraising. And their response was, well, that's nice for you. I mean, but you can't do that with our kind of donors. And he said, I didn't want to be rude, so I didn't say anything, but I looked at their list of top donors, and a third of them were people that I'd been visiting every year, just like this.
Hey, really?
And so to me,
Huh.
that concept, fortunately, somebody wrote a book called Go See People, and so can
Oh,
communicate the importance of this. But that concept was so powerful and here's what he told me. He said, I see more donors than any 5 fundraisers put together that I know. And he said, here's why. I don't have any dead time. He says, if we have a meeting that goes long, then I stay with that. If the meeting goes short, then, whatever it is, I just drive to the next address, knock on the door, and either leave that personalized handwritten note or, the thank you. And if I'm invited in, then we do the next one, right? So his practice was just this every year, just frickin' go see people. And it was amazing to see how this tiny little school had these massive fundraising results from this really weird fundraising approach. And so those were the kinds of things that for me was, as a president of a school, was just a really cool learning process. Because even then, I mean, I'm always a researcher. I'm always trying to discover, what's the secret sauce? What are you doing? What was a disaster or what worked great? And so that was the process there. So then
excuse
yeah,
me,
go
Russell,
ahead, Joe.
what do you think? How can we apply that to current day? I do know I've had some friends in higher ed who have done exactly that, have called, just gone, didn't have an appointment, and would show up and leave something. And she was very successful. But that was pre-pandemic. I don't know, do you think that could, I guess the only way is to try it, to test it, right? To see, especially a college, I think with you tell me, the affinity is strong, right? I've been doing a lot of healthcare lately, the last
Mm-hmm.
4 or 5 years. And there's an expression we have in the industry: grateful patient tears dry quickly. So for outright gifts, for major gifts, annual fund gifts, we're trying to get in front of them as soon as they're they're coming out of in a wheelchair out of the hospital. No, but we, we want to get them as soon as we can, because then that affinity fades. And I think with higher ed, it actually gets stronger as we get older, right? We get more sentimental.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe in higher ed, it would be, maybe others, I don't know, but higher ed, I guess you could test it. Just go out and start knocking on doors locally. Don't spend all the money on a flight, but maybe just try it and see what happens.
Yeah, and to me, what it really drove home was, this is what we're trying to get to. Now, maybe the methodology is going to be different, but we've got to build that sense of community with the donor. We've got to have that sense of personal connection. And I think there's probably lots of ways to do it. We can have the regional dinners, and let's invite people in and help build the community that way. We can, of course, there's virtual ways. But I think that to me was eye-opening, just to see how there's there's a lot of different ways to accomplish that goal. And when you have somebody who literally cannot physically do it the way we all do it, and then does something really weird that turns out to be super powerful, to me, it's sort of understanding, okay, this is where we're going, right? This is, and that's not to say I'm selling that as here's the way to get there. It's that I'm selling that as this is the destination. You figure out how you want to get there, right? But if you are not fulfilling the command of go see people, however you can make that happen, it's going to be really hard to work with that. And and in planned giving, I mean, you say what organizations are really successful? Well, it's either the organizations that are just naturally in front of people in their 80s or older, where the final documents typically tend to be signed, or it's organizations like the Salvation Army that just has it in their DNA to go see people, in particular, go see old people, right? We know how those sort of demographics work when it comes to planned giving. And so it is just this fundamental reality that I will tell people, look, I can give you all of the data, all of the precise metrics on propensity and who to spend your time on and who to focus on, and you can get as sophisticated as you want. And if you got some other organization that just goes and sees people, you can't compete with that, right? Like that just works. And so to me, it was that recognition of not so much, oh, here's the magic methodology. I mean, different communities, different cultures, different causes, maybe that would or wouldn't work. But the point is, you got to figure out some way to get there. You've got to figure out some way to solve the go see people problem. And if you do that, you're going to have those results. And again, I mean, yes, he was friend raising. Yes, he was ministering, but it was something that ended with an ask for them to consider. He didn't want that knee jerk go, here's a go away gift. He wanted to leave it with them, but it was a fundraising interaction as well. So anyway, that was an example of an experience when I was in that learning process.
And you just gave me an idea to do another version of my book, Go See People. And for the record, we did not rehearse this. Russell is kind enough to promote my book indirectly, but you just gave me an idea to do another planned giving versions and call it Go See Old People. Yeah, I'm
That's right.
Think about that.
Yeah.
Or maybe I'll do something. Go see
old, rich, childless people.
Thank you. You'll get I get a like a $75 royalty check every 4 months. I'll give you a cut.
I understand. I understand that world. Yes.
Awesome. So let's get back to you. That was awesome. Thank you. That was great. So you're not at your current place yet, right? You're not at Texas Tech yet at this point, are you? No.
Right. So I was college president for about 5.5 years. The school was really successful during that time. We more than tripled our on-campus enrollment. We constructed several new debt-free buildings, which was kind of a big deal for us to accommodate all of that growth. So I was happy about the results of that. When that job ended, and Joe, here I'm using a euphemism for I fired the nephew of a board member and later learned that I had resigned. So when that job ended, honestly, my career goal was to not be anyone's boss. I'm just like, I just want to do teaching and research, teaching in the classroom, research on the things that I care about. And so that's what I've done ever since. I was briefly at the University of Missouri and then several years at the University of Georgia. I actually didn't ever plan on leaving the University of Georgia, but I kind of got the offer that I couldn't refuse from Texas Tech University. And here's why that was so attractive. Now, believe it or not, Texas Tech University has one of the original and actually the largest financial planning program in the country academically. And because of that, they were able to offer me a position where I could come in and just teach charitable financial planning. And so that's what I've done ever since. I teach 2 graduate courses. One undergraduate on the law and taxes of charitable planning. And then I teach 2 graduate courses on decision making, one for planned gifts and one for major gifts. And aside from that, the only other course that I teach is one on behavioral finance, which fits very well with the research that I do, the neuroimaging and some of the other work like that. And so to me, that has been such a special opportunity. And I've been here since 2010. And so, in year 14 now of doing that. And that's given me the opportunity to really just do a deep dive into creating things that I'll first use them in my classroom. So of course, my first guinea pigs are always my students to see what connects with them, what helps them understand it, and then putting that material out into the world with the free YouTube videos or my digital books. I share the free copy of the digital versions of all of those for free. Hey, if you want to kill some trees, be my guest, get on Amazon. I do get, those massive royalty checks that don't quite mirror yours. Someday I hope to get to that $45 quarterly check, but so it's not the massive market, but it is a really important market that I think makes such a huge impact on the world. So if I can do something to help them in their work, that's a for me is a really multiplicative impact. And it's just been a great situation here for me. When I came in, we have what are called startup funds that you can use for research. And so
yeah, excuse me. I was going to ask you about, I mean, anybody knows your content. I remember being at a National Plan Giving Council and you had books there. You had printouts.
Mhm.
And, you know, when you're flying across the country, you're trying to travel light. And I remember you handed me like this book. I'm like, dude, I didn't say that. I'm thinking,
Visual
how
plan
do you
giving.
have the discipline to write all that? And how much time does that take when you're doing everything else? Can you talk about like how that works? Do you do that while you're on the clock, so to speak, at Texas Tech? How do you find the time? Because there's so much volume and there's just so much substance to it. How do you find
Yeah,
the time, yeah, to do all
yeah,
that?
yeah, and it is one of these things that I try to take advantage of the unique opportunity that as a faculty member at a research institution, writing things, obviously publishing the academic research, but then going beyond that to translate it to things that people can use. So it is a natural fit. So for example, visual plan giving, that's the textbook for the classes that I teach. So it's full of these crazy PowerPoint slides I love to use, right? Well, that's to keep my students from falling asleep, right? So it's sort of this natural kind of, if I use a high volume of slides with emotional faces, it kind of, it distracts them for long enough that we can keep them engaged through the process. So it's really just taking advantage of that kind of special opportunity where I'm allowed to spend all my time focused on this stuff that ultimately, leads to generating the material. Now, having said that, I am pretty kind of obsessive about putting the hours in when it comes to writing. And so I do have a schedule where I always try to get my writing hours in every day, try to get them in early, try to get that block of 3 to 4 hours a day every day.
Really?
And then everything else, I will kind of fall into different places, and I'll do different things to try to force myself to get stuff done. So, for example, volunteering to teach a class over at the law school because I knew that would force me to get the textbook done, and because I need to have that for the students, and just those different things, so what I will say is, at first, then it was a matter of I've got to construct this curriculum, right? They're allowing me to build this program. And so I've got these online courses. And in fact, if you take all 4 of them, you can get a graduate certificate in charitable financial planning. If you go online, you can continue and actually use those towards the master's in financial planning. We now have that online program. And so part of it was building out the curriculum. And that was the first few years. And so, for example, the visual plan giving would have been one of the earlier pieces. And of course, I have to update that every year because it's a law and tax piece. And then over the years, it's kind of transformed to something different because to kind of give you a career aspect there. When I started and was at the University of Georgia, my career goal was to not get fired. And in an academic space, that means making tenure, because the tenure process is either an up or out process, right? You either get lifetime employment or you got to look for work somewhere else. And so I was very much focused on 100% academic journal research, right? And so publishing in these things that only other professors read, right? Doing academic presentations at conferences of research conferences around the country, around the world. That was my sole focus. And it wasn't until later, and I had been at Texas Tech for a couple of years, and of course, I already had tenure and all that sort of thing, that a plan giving practitioner, consultant, she reached out to me, and she was a member of the National Capital Plan Giving Group. And she wanted me, she was one of those weird people that actually knew about the academic research and was like, hey, I've read your stuff. I think it would be interesting. Will you come present to the council? And so I said, well, sure, I'm happy to help out. And she did something that was so important for me at the time. She said, okay. And I'm like, I've not done this sort of thing before. And she said, okay, put together a presentation. I'll get a couple of other board members. We send it to us and talk through it. And at the time, it was just a conference call. This is pre-Zoom land, right? Talk through it, and we'll give you some feedback before you're in front of the audience. And it was so helpful for me to learn about. And that's where I was actually sharing some of the neuroimaging results. We put people in the brain scanner and had them make their charitable estate planning decisions to learn about that decision-making process. And so it was so helpful to learn, like, okay, this part, nobody cares about that. Don't talk about that. This part, this is what they're going to want to hear about, right? And so just learning that. And so then that started. I gave the presentation for the DC Plan Giving Group, and then through whatever means kind of became the flavor of the month. And so and then, oh, somebody else wants me. And I just loved it so much, right? That I was just going from place to place and presenting and doing so much of that. And over the years, it changed completely how I did research. And here's how. What I would do is I would go and present, and then people would ask questions. And some of the questions I would say, oh, here's the answer, we know. But some of the questions I would say, ooh, that's a great question. Give me a year, I'll get back to you, right? And so it would then be the fundraisers' questions that would drive my research agenda. Like, what are people asking? What do they want to know about? And so then it would be, okay, let's take it back into the lab. Let's do an experiment. Is there pre-existing data on that? Is there, national data sets that can answer that question? If there's not, can we set up some experiments to run? And so it's been this kind of iterative process of seeing what's of interest. Let's go work on that, then come back and present. And then, okay, now you get people at your presentation, but then they're going to have more questions. And, so that was the process, at least up until the last few years. And so that's kind of how that developed.
And you have students that help you that are part of, you said, do you use the term lab as kind of like a metaphor, or do you actually have students that are working with you that are helping you with all this research? Again, because there's just so much volume.
Yeah, so it
One person
depends.
can't do
When we
nothing.
were literally physically in the neuroimaging lab, then 100% I would drag grad students in, and they would do, the intake worksheet with people coming in. They would, be part of that process. And frankly, if somebody didn't make an appointment, we'd stick one of them in the brain scanner because we paid for the time, and it's $600 an hour. So we're going to be scanning somebody, right? And then also, I work with a lot of PhD students as faculty advisor. I have, for me, I'm happy to be an advisor for any of our PhD students, but they've got to do a topic that's either estate planning or charitable. Because that's what I know about. And if they're at least end of life planning. So that can include annuities. It can even include, one student did research on living wills, for example, the medical durable power of attorney for healthcare, that sort of thing. So as long as it's kind of in that space where I live, then like, I'm happy to help. And so some of the publications have been the result of the dissertation process. And so I'll be a co-author on those research publications to help them through that process of getting their first publications out the door. So it does interact that way. And it just depends upon the year and the student and what I'm doing and what they're interested in doing. And some years I'll have a whole gaggle of PhD students, and then other years I'll just have maybe a couple or 2 or 3 that I'm working with, and so they will get done or not get done at various paces, and so it's but yes, that's part of the process. We do graduate a lot of PhD students here, and I've had my graduates, my advisees, go on to, I just had one just got a position at University of Alabama as a faculty member there, and I've had them go on University of Utah, University of Missouri, and a lot of smaller private schools as well. So that is part of my job. So yes, we don't call it free slave labor, but it works.
You must have a lot of people that circle back to thank you and for all you did for them, right? I would think a lot of people, I would hope, that would
Yeah,
say,
we
made a
try
difference
to
in
we
my
try
life.
to stay in touch, and usually I get we get on a Zoom call whenever there's a career crisis, right? And so then we have to do some planning of, like, or they have a decision to make, or that sort of thing. And so I'm always happy to throw my 2 cents worth in on what they're doing, and if they're at a place that's a good fit for them, and various other options like that. Now, the truth of the matter is, only about half of my PhD students go into academia. The other half are not willing to take the vow of poverty, so they actually go into large financial services companies where they end up doing research in those fields.
Wow, amazing. Well, in the time we have left, can we talk a little bit more about you personally, if you're comfortable?
Sure.
This is all great, thank you, and you make it easy. All I have to do is sit here and nod, and I don't have to worry about. Sometimes you interview people, and it's like they give you one word answers, and you're like, oh crap, what am I going to ask them now?
Well,
But thank
Joe,
you.
I have to say, as a professor, I only know how to speak in 50-minute segments. So, I'm tamping it down a lot, honestly.
It's great stuff. And again, but I'd love not and we'd love to learn more about you. So do you have any hobbies other than research? Like, what do you tell us about whatever you're comfortable with? You have kids?
Yeah, sure. So, married 32 years. Yeah, 32 years now. Got to keep up with the numbers there. And 2 daughters. Youngest daughter is a sophomore at Oklahoma State University this year. And my older daughter currently teaches middle school math in the Houston School District. And so she is trying to survive her first year experience of doing that. And we're hoping she makes it till May, because it's been an
Oh, really?
intense experience. But yeah, so that's the family background. Interesting hobbies. Okay, so I definitely don't lead with this, because you don't want people in an audience to question your sanity before you start presenting all of your findings. But I do what you might call ultra marathons. And so every year, for about 9 years, essentially there's a single event that I will train for. It takes place at different places all over the world. And so the event usually takes place in a desert, occasionally on a mountain area somewhere, sometimes in different places. And it's with a company called Racing the Planet. There's actually a documentary about this
I
series
saw
called
that. I
Desert
watched that.
Runners.
I was going to ask you about that. I did
Oh,
see that.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, if you've seen Desert Runners, that's what I do every year. So it is. I explain it to people. It's very simple. You go out to the middle of the desert and you cover a marathon a day for 5 days. Except day 5 is a double marathon, and you got to carry everything on your back you're going to survive on during the week. Now they provide you with water, emergency medical, and a slot in an 8-person tent. And so everything else is on your own to see if you can complete the course. And I got to tell you, I've had some of the most for me, amazing life experiences finishing these. They're always 250-kilometer courses, 155 miles. And I have done these events in the Namibian desert in Southwest Africa, in a steppe in Mongolia. We even had a part of the Gobi Desert there, and in places from the South Island of New Zealand. One year was in the Republic of Georgia, along the old Silk Road, up in some of the mountains, Caucasus Mountains there, in Patagonia in southern Argentina. One year in Ecuador, up in the mountains around Mount Cotopaxi. And so these are things. Last fall was actually the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, which is at a pretty substantial altitude, about 10,000 feet, and quite just the memorable experience. So for me, I am really fascinated by seeing the things that God has made. I enjoy seeing cities. That's fine, but for me, it's just seeing the amazing things in nature. And obviously, I'm coming from as I mentioned with my career, coming from that faith background of a Christian perspective, and so just being out, spending time, there's a lot of one-on-one time when you're doing these events because people spread out dramatically. There are some very fast people, and I am not among them. But things get spread out, and you spend a lot of time out. It just you and God in the desert, and with all of the stuff that's been created. And so I try to do one of those a year, and so we'll hopefully for as long as I can until something breaks or falls off. I'm going to keep trying to do one of those a year. And this fall, I'm scheduled to, if all goes well, to do one in the Petra region of Jordan, and so hoping that goes well. So that's in September. So it's a good thing you're getting this interview done in advance in case I don't come back. But hopefully I'll be able to go and come back. So
Ever
that's
have any danger, either health issues or like people trying to give you a hard time, or weather where it was so hot that you were any of those?
Yeah, one of the
Or
reasons that I actually always go with just this one company, Racing the Planet, is I have kind of gotten some over the years behind the scenes look on how good they are at dealing with medical emergencies, weather emergencies, even in cases of how do we keep the hyenas off the course, right? So they are just an excellent organization at delivering on that. And believe it or not, we typically will have the medical staff has in various years been ER physicians from Stanford Medical Center. This last race I had was from University of South Carolina Medical Center. And part of it is because they actually conduct experiments on us if you sign up for it, because, you're not allowed to torture people, but if they're going to torture themselves anyway, then you can test them while they're doing that. So we get researchers and of course I always sign up for the research because I'm a researcher, and so we actually have really good support on that. So yes, some situations of danger, but always good kind of supervision of that. And actually, this last race, I will tell you, Joe, something that was brand new, that was different than you saw in the documentary, lovely with technology, is when you run now, you run with something they put on your shoulder. That's a GPS that has an emergency button on it. And if you click that emergency button, no matter where you are, number one, you're out of the race, and no matter where you are, they will come get you. And so even if you're isolated by yourself, you are on a course that's set out. And I like to say the reason I do these races, somebody would say, well, like for example, Namibia, they have lions, they have hyenas. Aren't you worried about that? And I say, no, fortunately, I'm not very fast, so they'll be completely full by the time I get there.
that is wild. So how much are you training every week?
So this was
That's
something
amazing.
that was my dramatic life transformation, and we were talking about this a bit before the recorded conversation started. But I was in the middle of doing these, crazy speaking schedule, and I was speaking in London and in Paris, and bringing the family with me, and then Canada, and then just like all over, because I said yes to everything because each individual thing was a cool thing to do, right? And I kind of started having the physical effects from that. And so the very first of these races that I had ever done, and that would have been 9 years ago now, so I guess 2015, was in Ecuador, in Mount Cotopaxi. I was still had a cough from a whooping cough that I had gotten from all of this travel and crazy schedule, but I wasn't contagious or anything. Just it takes a month or so before that cough goes away, and I thought I was ready for the race, and I was not. I number one came in with the heaviest backpack of anybody in the race by
how
a
heavy?
large margin.
Any idea
Um,
how heavy?
that's
Roughly?
a great question. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember that I was a few pounds heavier than the second heaviest, backpack. And the other thing was, I looked around, and at the time, I looked around at, we had our first briefing for everybody in the race. I looked around and I thought, I might have 50% of the body fat in this room on me right now. And so, that race, I did not finish it. Instead of, making it all 5 days, I made it a couple days,
No.
and I had the most amazing experience ever.
Hmm.
And so I had ended up with a few days because changing an international flight was way too expensive. And I had a bunch of points built up at the Holiday Inn Express there in Quito, Ecuador. And so, I had a few days to kind of, okay, we need to make some life decisions, right? That I'm living life at a pace that is not sustainable, not physically sustainable. And one of the things that really hit me on that race was we were going through these villages, very remote, indigenous people. And one of it was to see that, for example, we would run along on a dirt road, come to a T intersection, and there'd be a whole family sitting out there. And this was their entertainment for the day, was the fact that there was and the fact that they were still there when I got there meant they'd been there a couple hours. Okay, because this was towards the end. And then we would go into the villages, and you would see, you have your house, and you have your cow that's tied up in the front yard. And it was just kind of this experience where I felt like God was trying to get me to recognize, this pace of life, this modern sort of thing, this is not what I constructed humans for, right?
Hmm.
That we were constructed for a different kind of community, a different pace of life. And so, so that kind of all came together for me to a decision point. And that resulted in two things. One, I went to my department chair, my boss at the time, and I said, I need you to tell me that I'm not allowed to travel anymore to speak, because I don't want to turn down people. They
Hmm.
represent good causes. I love speaking to them. And I don't, and a friend of mine said, well, just raise your prices. I'm like, yeah, but these are organizations that represent sick kids and puppies. And, it's not the same as if I was speaking to, life insurance companies or something. And so, so I just shut it down. And that then gave me the opportunity to focus more on writing. And the current book series, a couple of years ago, I had 4 new books in the book series that came out, and I've got so that was the storytelling fundraiser, the epic fundraiser, the primal fundraiser, and then the one that's probably most useful is the Socratic fundraiser. I'm currently working on a book project for the last 3 years, should be done this summer, called the Biblical Fundraiser for Christian Ministries.
Nice.
And so that opened up that opportunity. And then, when the pandemic hit, then man, everybody wants Zoom. And so then, I've been doing a lot more of that. And now I tend to only go out when I have new material. And the reason is that I can't test my new material on Zoom, because I can't get that emotional audience feedback. I can't get those after presentation conversations, right? And so so I try to limit when I'm going out. And if I do have new material, so for example, part of the book writing process for that last 4 book series early on is going out, and I did it intensively during the summer, 2 months. I'm just out, so that I could see, oh, this is landing. Oh, this part is not landing at all, and stuff that I thought was complete genius, fell flat, and some other stuff didn't. So, but I try to be more limited. Then the other thing, I got a treadmill desk. So all day
You have it right
long,
there?
Yeah, so I have a stand-up desk that goes up and down. So I'm sitting down right now. I press a button, this desk goes up. I unfold it's called a walking pad. It folds up, and then I just unfold it, and I'm just walking all day long. And so for me, on the weekend, yeah, you need to add some cardio onto that, right? So I try to do some cardio, some longer cardio on the weekends. But what I learned was that just walking, and you have to gradually build up, because you think you can walk all day, you can't. You actually have to build up to it. And so the fact that, for me, like a normal day is at least, 13 miles. I mean, I at least got to get a half marathon in, but it's walking until the weekends when I'm actually running something. I found that over, at least it took about a year, but it builds up the structure, the strength of your feet, the, sinews, whatever, to where 155 miles is like, yeah, your body's like, oh yeah, we can cover this, no problem. And so then it's just a matter of adding the cardio on top of it. And so that's how the time works out, because normally for these long events, it takes so much time to train. And the other thing is to recognize that I have different goals. My goal is to finish. It's not to be, internationally competitive. Now, honestly, I do normally end up in the top half of the race, but I found that if I go all out, max out my training, I can move from just above the top half to just below the top third. And that delta, that difference, isn't compelling enough for me to just focus on it all the time. So I just do that to try to finish and have the experience. And so I'll sign up for, 50Ks, or usually not road races if I can avoid it, marathons. I always like trail races, but I'll do those along the way. But those are just training races for me for my big tent pole event, and one a year, at least until I can't do that anymore.
That's amazing. That is incredible. As your wife must be very patient and tolerant with all this time you're spending doing all this
It
stuff.
Yes. So that is the kind of, we can be wealthy in different ways. And to have a spouse who, now it's easier because the kids are out of the house. But to be able to 9 years ago say, hey, I want to go to Ecuador and spend these many thousands of dollars so I can go run this race because I saw a documentary called Desert Runners, and this looks like a cool thing to do, when I had literally never run anything other than a 5K before in my life. And to have someone who, says yes. And I will tell you, Joe, we normally do. Now, she's not at all interested in the racing stuff, but for example, with Ecuador, we flew into Quito together. We spent a week doing tourist stuff, and I'm doing that to acclimate to the altitude. But also, we do these things together. In the same way, when I did the Namibian race, we flew into South Africa. We did a safari there, and then and she leaves before the craziness starts.
Does she leave? Really?
Yeah. Right. So she's not going to be there during the run,
Okay.
but we do the international travel together whenever possible. And it doesn't 100% of the time work out like that, but whenever we can, then we try to set it up that way.
That's so cool. Russell James, you never disappoint. Really
Thanks,
amazing.
Joe.
Great stories. Thank you.
Happy to share.
Yeah, and Encourage Generosity is the website.
Yeah, encouragegenerosity.com. You can get all my stuff for free there, all my digital versions of all my books for free, links to all of my videos online, and some of my research papers. And if you want, you can learn about the online graduate certificate in charitable financial planning. Now, they do not give me a commission on that, so I am not a good salesman for it, but I would love to have you in the classes if you're interested in that sort of thing as well.
That's so cool. Thank you very much. Awesome. Great
Thanks,
to be
Joe.
with you.
Great to be here.
God bless. Thanks.
You as well.